make a motion, please, to conscript Mr. Amos into one more meeting of slavery here as our temporary secretary-treasurer.
Motion to appoint Mr. Amos as our secretary-treasurer to this evening.
Second. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? And that is carried. Thank you. We have the item number 2 there, adoption of minutes of May the 24th. So moved.
Second.
Any discussion on the minutes? All those in favor? And that is carried. Thank you. Adoption of the agenda.
I'd like to make an addition to the agenda.
An addition?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm aware that we're also going to have a request for a deletion. So I think that what we'll do, if everyone's all right with this, is we're going to deal with these items individually and vote on them individually. Okay? So Sheila, what is your addition?
Well, it's an item that arises out of the minutes relating to the motion that we passed relating to the transportation report at the last meeting, and also get a bit to the report.
Sheila, just a sec. You can't go into too much. What is the specific thing you would like added?
I would like to add a discussion about transportation, and specifically a letter we received today. And I think it would be appropriate to add it to old business because it arises out of the minute in 2 different places.
Okay, so you'd like item number 3, bus transportation, or busing, B-U-S-I-N-G, transportation. Bus transportation added under old business. Okay, so I think we'll just take a vote now to see. So it requires unanimous consent to add or delete anything from an agenda. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I was curious. You referenced something that we received today.
I received it. It's an email. I'm not sure if everyone else is, but it has stimulated me to bring forward this work session.
Okay, so adding under F, old business number 3, bus transportation, I guess recommendation would be board discussion. So you're moving that be added. Do we have a seconder?
I'll second it.
Any further discussion on that item? All those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Okay. Sherry, did you have a request for us?
I do, Madam Chair. I would ask, and with your indulgence, I'm coming late to this. It just occurred, the decision that I needed to make just occurred today. If I could ask that we delete from the regular board agenda an article under my management report that is called Policy 2000 R2 Secretary Treasurer, currently found in the board pack on page 51.
Maybe just seek a little further advice from you. Does it make sense to remove both items?
No, it does not. They were standalone.
Okay, thank you. So anyone like to make that motion? Second. Any further discussion? All those in favor? And that is carried. Thank you. Tom?
So in advance of agenda setting, I had asked for the inclusion of the motion that's contained in the Stacey Holloway report regarding the independent review.
I had sent an email out with respect to that. Did you receive that?
No. Which email was that?
I'm sorry, there was one. I think I sent it out perhaps on Sunday. And I'll tell you the story of what happened as it's contained in the email. I don't know if anybody's got it here. I could read it to you. But it went out to the whole board, and I believe Mr. Amos and Sherry and Sheila. What had happened was at our agenda setting meeting, I had asked for under old business for it to be the committee of the whole motions and a third motion, which would be the motion that was contained in the report that said that the board should conduct a full and independent review. So that was the discussion at agenda setting. What happened next was the draft agendas came out, and there was a little, there in the paragraph in the report, it says, there's a little preamble pieced in the sentence that says something along the lines of that I'm recommending that the board should have a full or a public. So I asked that that little piece, the preamble to the motion, be deleted. And instead what happened when the agendas were released, the entire motion was deleted from the agenda. So what I had said in my email was that I think procedurally, there's no problem with us putting, if somebody wants to put that motion, that it be put on the agenda. Or I said that if someone wanted the agenda, here, you can pass this so you can see what I'm talking about. And I said, or if someone would like the agenda reprinted with this added, I would be fine with that too. And so I received no feedback. So we just continued with the agenda as it was distributed on Friday, with the understanding that that item can easily be brought forward. So I'm sorry that you didn't see the email. You see what I mean, what happened?
Yeah, so basically we can move forward.
Yeah,
if that's
absolutely. If
there.
someone would like to put that motion, that's not a problem at all.
So I would like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if you would like that added at this time, that's a fine way to do it as well.
I second it.
Yeah, you're making that motion?
Yes.
Okay, Janice is seconding it. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor?
Where's it going?
Underneath the sort of item number F1 Part C, and that's unanimously carried. Thank you.
Thank you.
Janice?
Procedure on the actual agenda. There's 3 items under Manager's Report number 2, number 8, and under Treasurer's Report number 1. I'm wondering what the process is of having to deal with those items on 3. We are required by the School Act to have a budget passed before the 30th, and we have quite a lot on the agenda. So I'm wondering procedurally if I can make a motion that we...
In a minute you can, as I advised you by email, that once the agenda is approved, then I will ask for a trustee to make a motion to move those 3 things to the
So I
front.
didn't read that, so I...
Okay. Any other questions with respect to the agenda? Okay, so all those in favor of carrying the agenda as amended, and that is unanimously carried. Thank you. Okay, so we did have an in-camera agenda. We will be going back into in-camera, and we talked about property matters, legal matters, and personnel matters. Thank you. Okay. So now I would like to ask if someone could make a motion to move items I1 budget, H2 achievement report, and H8 literacy plan to be dealt with now.
As I stated, I'd like to move those, please.
Thank you. Anyone like to second that? Okay. Any discussion? All those in favor? And that is unanimously carried. So we'll proceed to go to the budget first, I guess.
You've got the briefing note attached, and I'll read parts of it anyways. So we got together as a board just to give us an idea, to give you an update. So some of these notations that you've got following the briefing note, of course, is from the presentation that I gave you at our superintendent's meeting. But what I brought you up to date was that it's anticipated currently for the end of June 2011, we're estimating a surplus to be in the $200,000 range. This does not include, when I wrote this briefing note, I anticipated some of the news that would be forthcoming. So, but point being, that $200,000 does not include any additional grants that were going to be released by the ministry before the end of the year, with the anticipation that any new funds would just roll into our surplus for year-end for future years' usage. Enough said. We also continue to have some surpluses available to us through the use of restricted capital reserve, local capital, and of course the operating surplus. The intention of the 11-12 annual budget was prepared as a status quo objective. Obviously, staffing and programming will remain essentially the same as 10-11. We accounted for any known expenditures, increases for benefit rate increases that we knew about, additional insurance costs that were passed on to us, any revenue reductions or additions that we knew about, the lease, for example, of the Consular Scholar Francophone. That was all taken into account for the revised, or the presented budget. At that meeting that we, after mentioned meeting, we brought forward a couple of small additions for the board to consider. The emergency preparedness, the district challenge, and then added to that was also what was previously supported was the gender identification policy implementation. So here before you are those items. What it amounts to is a budget bylaw that has a net expenditure with the intent of using appropriated surplus for balancing the budget effectively. Okay?
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions or comments at all? Corinne?
I do, actually. Well, I'm really happy that we're in a rollover budget district. In some weird way, I think it's sort of torpedoed our budget process. I've had several conversations with members of our partner groups who sit along with myself in the Budget Advisory Committee, and all of them have expressed to me their frustration and dissatisfaction with the process, and I have to admit that I do echo those feelings. While we met early enough in the year that we could have plenty of conversation and we got plenty of education on the state of the district and the state of our budget, we never really got to those meaty conversations, despite the fact that we had requested on several occasions to have those conversations regarding cuts that have been made in the past. So, for example, for me, last year we cut the position of the cafeteria work at Bangay. I was hoping that at that table we could have the conversations about how did that affect the program, how did it affect the school, did we need to bring it back? If so, was there something we were willing to cut? I really wanted to have the conversation about all of the items that we had previously cut at that table. I do believe in the Budget Advisory Committee, but not as it's running currently. I think it's valuable because at that table we have partner members from every partner group we have. And these are the people who live our budgets. And so for me, I like that we met early. I think we should continue to do so, and getting the information about the state of the district is really important. But we do need to get the input from these partner groups. They're sitting there. And so at the last Budget Advisory meeting, Assistant Superintendent Sheila Shanahan led us through a value exercise, which I thought was quite valuable. And in that exercise, we said, what would we add back to the budget? What would we take away, or would we just keep it the way it is? And I think those conversations with our partner groups is the way to go. That they, from that table, they can all get together, do that valuing process, and do it fairly early on, I suspect, so they can have in-depth conversations. They can come up with a list of suggestions that they then give to the board to consider during the budget process. So really, I guess what I'm saying is we need to get to the advisory position here, that these people give us a lot of time, and there's a lot of information to be garnered at that table. And I think we need to do that whether we have a deficit budget or whether we're in a rollover budget, because just because a budget worked one year doesn't mean it's the appropriate budget for the next year. And I think it's important that we have that particular group helping us. So I would like to thank the members who sat on that committee with me and for all their hard work, and I would really like to encourage you to come back and help us make it a better process so that we can get the input that we actually really need from them. So that's all I have to say.
Okay. Anyone, comments, questions? Jan?
So as I read this budget, there's two things that came across my mind. Is we're very fortunate to have a district staff who are able to ensure that it is a rollover budget, not when we're deficit, where we're cutting programs. And I look at my colleagues in Saanich, and I look at the turmoil that they're going through and the infrastructure that they're dealing with. So I thank our staff for that. As a trustee on a board, I like a board when it realizes that things need to change. And the Budget Advisory Committee, the way it's set up, I felt as a trustee who wasn't on that committee sort of left out of the conversation. And not being a part of a conversation where I heard from our QP, our CDTA, or our parents and that, it gives me a little bit of hesitation on supporting the budget. I think it's a really great budget, but I feel all the information that I need having that in-depth conversation. So I agree with Trustee McClellan on that. As a conversation needs to be having more in-depth with all our partners as an entire board rather than just a committee. That's my personal opinion. I also look at the structure our district has, and I look forward as next year. And sometimes we talk about a rollover budget. Just because it worked in the past doesn't necessarily mean we need to go forward in the future and be able to look for changing and adapting. And our district is actually a leader in our province. We're doing that with some of the initiatives that we're doing. I will be supporting this budget as presented tonight. I think there's a lot of hard work and a lot of hours and time went in with the community working on that. But I also like as a board for us maybe in the fall, and when I'm here next year, I hope to be here next year, we look at a different process where we have a more inclusive and have that philosophical conversation and look at where we want to go with the district, ensuring that the money is supporting students, staff, and the entire district where we want to go with that 21st century learning model. So I will be supporting it tonight. I thank you all for that. I think staff did exactly what the board directed us to do. We asked you to do a rollover budget. You did that. But I would like to see more consultation in the fall with more of the board members being involved in that, so we can have that philosophical discussion. And I know for a fact that CUPE's on side with this, and parents are on side with that, and CD on side with that I can make yes and no's where we're going. So that's my thoughts on it. But thank you again for the hard work that you've done.
Danny?
And I'd like to thank the members of the committee for the time and their input. However, there's one item there that kept coming up several times, and I think Trustee McClellan mentioned it, is that cafeteria worker, which I assumed would be back rolled into the budget because it became a safety issue, among other things. And initially we were told when we cut that position it was about $35,000 a year. Actually it's not, it was about $17,000 a year, and I'm proposing that we increase the budget by that $17,000 and put that position back in place.
Procedural question for you. How do we deal with such a request?
Yeah, friendly amendment is, I've got a value here, noting that it may come forward. I've got a value of what basically we would cross out the old value and put in the new value as a friendly amendment to indicate that this has now been added to the bylaw. So yeah, it would just be an understanding that the new number is as stated once that motion was accepted.
So is that $17,000?
Yes, so I've got 17,000 to bring it up to 315,528. But again, I'm looking for a direction.
So it would go to 75,298, 545?
Could go to 75,315,528.
Oh, yeah, see, this is where I need a calculator. You can tell I wasn't a math
Well, that's
whiz.
why I didn't bring my calculator, because then I'd be doing this, and I would be saying
17,000, not 17,000.
Yeah, but I do need.
51% math. Well, what can I say? Okay.
Thanks.
Tom?
So the relatively modest dollars aside, Dan, you referenced that it became a safety issue. Can you
It's presented by the people that actually worked there that the loss at that point before was a safety issue, as well as a supervision issue over the items leaving the area and not being purchased properly. So creating a net loss.
Do you have further questions?
Well, can I ask for an opportunity for management perhaps to respond to that?
So we wouldn't be recommending this, as we have spoken before. Certainly, as we welcome the addition from trustees. We heard the concerns of the CUPE president and in the back process. I investigated that, talked to the administration team at Vanier. They have a different perspective on that. I shared those concerns at BAC, I believe, the last time, or at the superintendent liaison meeting, and that we had a different perspective as senior management on that. It's not about the value of the position at all, but certainly not those safety concerns were never brought forward to senior staff, not brought forward to the administrative team in any way other than there was general concern about the structure and the organization of the cafeteria program. So not that we, the board, well, not that we wouldn't put that position back in place if the board felt they wanted to make the motion to do that. When the board asked us for our senior staff recommendation around that cafeteria program, we said that the original intent of that third cafeteria worker had been very clear from the very beginning. It was that particular position was to be sustained financially by the program itself, as it is in most culinary arts programs across the province. There's an initial baseline of staffing that's given when you're growing a program, and that over time, that third position, it's a half-time position, which was our original error when we talked about it last year, saying it was $35,000. To be fair, it was only a half-time position, and that position had always been expected to be sustained by the program itself, and that the program itself, determined by the learning objectives and the number of students who are enrolled, necessitates 2 workers for certain, which are funded by the staffing from the district, but not, if they would like a third, and after it was initially up and rolling, they were to sustain that with the profits from the program. When we looked at the cuts last year, and we were making tough cuts all the way around, that was one where we had come to a place that through the normal HR practices, we were going to be asking the school, can you support this position? And at the time, they said they couldn't. So that was one of the reasons why it was cut, that we weren't going to continue to support it. We'd served notice for 2.5 years that we weren't going to continue to support it in the budget year of last year. So we didn't, and it didn't come forward this year as a recommendation from senior staff. However, we would certainly be more than happy to put it back inside the budget if that motion comes from the board. At BAC, we heard, to be fair to the QP president, that conversation the one time, and I don't know how or why we never heard any more about that conversation, which speaks to the process. As Trustee McClellan has said, we need a better process, obviously, at BAC, and we're looking forward to redesigning that process for next year. We didn't see a motion from BAC or a recommendation from BAC that spoke specifically to the cafeteria program, so we were torn about the direction. And then when we spoke about it at the superintendent liaison, didn't hear from more than one trustee about putting that back in the budget. So encouraged the trustee to bring it forward tonight for your perusal. And we'll be happy to implement it if you add it to the budget.
Anyone else? Fran?
So 2 questions. One, I don't understand the safety issue. Is it safety of students, safety of other staff? So that's the first question. If I could hear a little bit more about that. And then the second question for management, in terms of the district challenge program, is the money for elementary in particular? Is it for secondary? Has that even been explored yet?
So Madam Chair, Director Schatz spoke about that at the liaison meeting. So would you want to just speak about the gifting?
In our recommendation, we asked that the position be a kind of transition kind of position, so that that person would do the work on the grade 7 challenge series and would also do some of the grade 6 teaching and do the in-school support at the elementary schools in that grade level, which would be grade 6 and grade 7.
Thank you.
Yeah, Sheila, you were next, and then Danny. Yeah. Oh, sorry, there was a second question, Sherry. That's right, the safety.
I'm not, it has never been brought forward to me as the superintendent or Sheila Shanahan as the assistant superintendent in charge of secondary, and I'll let her speak because she's talked about it. And certainly when I spoke with the principal at Vanier, that has never been brought forward as a significant, serious safety issue. There was some theft that was that folks connected to the lack of that third position, and I'm not certain that there was an agreement on the part of all staff in the program and their admin team that was actually connected to the fact that there wasn't that third worker. Sheila, do you want to talk about that?
Chair, if I could respond, it did come forward through our QP liaison pieces early in the fall, and so I visited the school, and we actually visited with the cafeteria program. I observed it on 2 occasions. I spoke with the administrator. We removed it from our list of concerns for this year, feeling it could be brought forward if in fact those workers were advised to contact their administration should things not go well. There was another busy time when semester changed. When that happens, there's new students in the cafeteria. It's naturally a time when the students are not familiar with the procedures in the cafeteria, and it gets a little, they're learning their new pieces as well. But I know early in September that we did make some changes around ensuring that a duty supervisor was present in the cafeteria, monitoring the cash registers so that the workers that were there were able to actually, allow the free flow of people through the cash registers without worrying about the theft, etc. Because you're training the students. Part of their program is to learn cash. So, we value that. So we have to provide them that opportunity. So in September and in February, there are certainly heightened times around learning new skills, and it seems a little chaotic, but it certainly settles out after that. So that's why it was removed as an issue that I was dealing with at that time, and it was left with the administration of the school.
Just finally, Madam Chair, one thing I forgot to add was that it was pointed out, I pointed out, to be fair, to the principal at Vanier that this, and provided him with the documentation that this had been a position that had been expected to be taken up the cost of it to be taken up after the second year in the culinary arts program, and that the principal of that school has resources that he could choose to, that he and his staff, and through his budgeting process, and they could choose to use to fund that position. They have money inside the budget to do that as well.
Sheila?
Well, I think this is one of those cases where it's exactly about the issues about process and what we need to improve. And I have probably 20 little things that I think are pretty important and I'd like to put in, but I don't think it's the board's role to cherry pick and put forward specifics. I think it comes back, as Karine said, to the process of reviewing what we're doing. And I see two other, I'm very interested in two things in our agenda here about our achievement contract and about our strategic planning, where I see the relationship between the budget and those two processes. I think that we're in a place of kind of consolidating and holding that the back has got a process a little changed. It's something I advocated for in the past, and it had more to do with really getting our stakeholder groups together early and that ties in with both the strategic planning for phys ed and sports, for our arts, for our enrichment programs, that we do some in-depth evaluation and we have ongoing evaluations of them that will feed into the budget process. Then I believe firmly that the board's place in that is in setting the overall vision and in making the links and the expectation that staff will run programs that result in student achievement. And that's where our role goes, not in the specific program choices. And that really ultimately, all of our schools are tight on money. All of them make choices about which bits and pieces they supplement or cut back on, where they look for volunteer participation, where they look for community sponsors, where they find student initiative. And I think that we need to stay out of that part. So I would not support an amendment at this point. And I certainly support us doing more work with our senior management and with all our stakeholders to improve the process in the coming year.
Danny and then Karine.
Okay, first off, I heard more than once at the Budget Advisory Committee, as I believe that at least the President raised each and every one of them. My understanding was from the Secretary-Treasurer that it would be included. I don't see it there, so trying to think. The other thing is, in the budget, there's $120,000 allocated to that cafeteria. And I understand they spend $120,000 on materials. So to me, that doesn't sound like it's being used at any point to generate revenue to cover the additional costs. So it's being used solely as a teaching cafeteria, and that's it. So either they start raising their revenue or start keeping a closer eye on the how the cash is being generated there, or to support that additional position. At this point, I would propose an amendment to add an additional $17,000 to the budget.
Okay, so how we'll deal with that is we'll read the amendment or read the motion with that in it, and if it passes, it passes, and if it doesn't, it doesn't. Okay? Karine?
Yeah, I actually will support this amendment, and it's largely because the Budget Advisory Committee simply didn't work this year. And it was at the last Budget Advisory Committee meeting, which I believe we had in early June, but I finally asked, right out, tell me about the cuts. And that's when we heard that it was a safety issue and all the other things that the QP president brought up. And at the same time, I asked about Challenge, which was another cut that we had made last year. And that's when I got the answer, we need the money back. So for us to put the money back in for Challenge, although it didn't come out of the Budget Advisory Committee and they had a representative sitting on there, and he should have had those conversations because it was a previous cut, to give money back to Challenge and not give it back to the cafeteria worker at this juncture just doesn't seem right to me. It feels like an end run around the field goal. End run around the goal to me. And so for me, because the information came to me at the same time, at the same meeting, one without the other does not feel right. So I will stand behind the amendment.
Terry?
So, Madam Chair, I'm hoping that I'm just being hypersensitive, that the end run comment isn't that senior staff.
No, not at all,
did-
not at all.
Because it certainly wasn't our intention. On our perspective, we've asked several times for clarification on this. And to be fair to Trustee White, he has been a brilliant advocate for this particular position. But really, Trustee White has, and we haven't. I look for consensus on your faces all the time. I look for nodding heads. I look for motions. I look for whatever. And the conversations that I've been included in around this position have not led to anything other than a brilliant advocacy, nodding of heads from more than one or two folks. And I do agree that I've heard for the last 3 months or so, as I've become more involved in, as I've picked up the Secretary Treasurer's role on a couple of issues, clearly what the strategic plan document for myself talks about is a new process around budgeting that is much more inclusive. But at the end of the day, at the superintendent liaison meeting on budget requested by the board, where we gave you our recommendations, that was our chance. You had liaison with the CDTA, liaison with QP, liaison with principals and vice principals, and I'm not sure if you had a liaison with ESPA. Senior staff came forward with their recommendations, and we spoke to why this wasn't on our list. And I encouraged you at the time to say, as I did just now, that if this is something you would like on your list, that's great, we'll make it happen. For all the reasons that we shared in liaison and about the program and all of those things, we determined, and the work that was done by the assistant superintendent, we determined that this wouldn't make our list this year. It wasn't that we were trying to trade one off against the other. Our professional expertise as senior staff said that we saw a gap in educational services in the gifted challenge piece, and that's why Director Schatz brought that recommendation forward for the additional staffing for gifted. That we had benchmarks, which we shared with you, about what was on our list and how it got there. So again, I hope you don't interpret that because it's not on the list, because we didn't necessarily, we're trying to not make that happen. At Superintendent Liaison, when this came up, I looked at you and as a group and said, what are we doing with this?
Just to remind you, there were only 5 trustees at liaison, not 7.
But to be fair, we didn't see anything that was consensus to move it forward, though I did encourage Trustee White, and we had a plan B, that you would bring it forward. That's what you boards do. They add things to the budget.
Thanks, Janice. Katie?
So this goes back to the budget advisory system and being this is new to me. This is brand new. This is the first time. I had to leave early from that meeting for another commitment. This is the first time I've heard that this was a major issue, having that as cafeteria worker. So tonight, this is brand new information for me. So I'm unaware of all the implications other than what I'm hearing at the table here. So for me to make a decision based on information, I'm actually quite torn. I support the position, but I also feel that the school has money should do, and it's not our job to micromanage. That's my personal opinion. But on the other hand, I have a question to ask senior staff, and this is if the board chooses to stay status quo, the 75,298,528, is there a possibility in September that you could come back to us, and just if we just stay status quo, and come back to us and say, you know what, we really need this position. We found that it must be. Is there a possibility to review it back then, or do we need to have this done tonight? That's what I need to know from you guys tonight, is that come September, can you review the program, review the cafeteria, so this is something that we're adamant we must have for safety, all that, and we come back to it, or is it something that we must do tonight? So I need to have that clarification, because Danny's argument tonight is brand new, yours is out, and I'm sort of
So,
not...
Trustee Kate,
Yeah.
you're aware that we never... So this is the proposed budget, and
Okay.
budgets change. We
Okay.
always come back to you, and I think it's, November,
yeah.
February,
February
when we
needs
actually pass the
amended.
actual budget, because all kinds of staffing changes from September, the number of special needs students who come to the district, the decline or the increase in enrollment. So absolutely, this is the proposed budget. It's benchmarks, and they change. We've never ever had a time where we budgeted more money than we needed, really. It's usually we have to come back and then we have to add additional staffing. So no, you can't. And then we would need you to direct us to go back and review our decision. And we can do that. We did consider all of the things you have so far suggested. But if you'd like us to go back and reconsider a decision, we can certainly do that. But we did consider most of the things that you just shared. But we can. And we certainly add staffing by the end of September fairly frequently. And it does change the budget numbers.
divisions are needed to be added, so you add a staffing member.
Bill 33 will change our budget.
Okay.
So I haven't spoken yet. I see Corinne and Sheila, you've had your hands up, but I would like to speak sort of in the middle of this. On the way to work this morning, I heard Helen Parker, the chair of the Saanich Board, doing a very good job speaking on CBC with respect to the difficult position that they're in, and the way schools are funded and so forth is just very difficult to work with. And I have to say that I think I've made this comment a few times before, that I'm very glad that we've had a chief secretary-treasurer in our district who has ensured that we've had conservative budgets. Chief might not have been what I said, maybe Corinne said it. Then that we are in a good position here, and that our board has looked to be conservative along with him. So it's nice to be in this position. I noticed in the briefing note this evening that Ron, you too had identified that the Budget Advisory Committee needed to be reviewed and there needs to be terms of reference established. When that Budget Advisory was originally convened, the word advisory was no accident in there. It was convened with the intention that we get advice on our budget. And I think that we haven't been getting advice. We've gotten feedback from a few people. And interestingly, we got 2 pieces of feedback on the Holloway report, and maybe more this afternoon, I don't know, but 2 pieces of feedback on the Holloway report, and one of them was somebody saying that the Budget Advisory Committee needs to have an opportunity to actually give us advice. So I'm looking forward to seeing what changes those are. With respect to the cafeteria worker, I too would be actually in support of adding that. I can't sort of abide by the argument that it wasn't, the cafeteria worker wasn't raised by school administrators or brought up in some other way to catch our attention, because, to be fair, the school principals didn't bring up the challenge position either. And so we get our feedback in different ways, and I think we rely probably very mostly on the feedback that we get from senior staff. But I think in a year when there was not really good opportunity for us to get advice at the Budget Advisory Committee, I think I would be inclined this year to favor adding the cafeteria worker, and then have a better discussion about it next year. So I will be supporting that. So I want to say that management's town hall that you had was excellent. I thought it was really
On the hockey game.
super. Yeah, I know we had a bit of, but often people don't come. I know 3 years or 4 years ago, we had a lot of people come to our budget meetings. It was a really good format, and unfortunately, there was really only one real member of the public that came. But I think there's another message to be derived there. There was one real person that came. Everybody else had some kind of a link to the district that came. But I think there is another message there. I think that people actually see us as doing some pretty good work here in the district, and that they feel that things are going quite smoothly. I know the people in this district, and if they were not happy with what was happening, they would show up at our door with placards. They would run buses outside on Cumberland Avenue when we had our in-camera meeting. They would be beeping their horns. They would have a rally, or they would raise money and maybe take legal action against us. And none of that actually has happened. So I think they must be generally okay with how things are going. Not perfect. I don't profess that we're perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but I think generally it seems to be okay. I did have a question with respect to having a budget for in-service money for 21st century learning, or as we call this, today's learning for tomorrow's world. And I didn't see that in here anywhere. Have you decided that that's not needed, or?
Yes. $100,000 that was requested last year, so I said to Sherry, I said, once we get an idea of where we've spent this year against that money, I believe there's probably some of that, if not a lot of that, is still left. So before we go back to the board and ask for further funds through the local capital account, that we would see where we are for that, and we would use the available funds out of that first, and then if we need to, because the local capital doesn't need to be passed with the budget, we can bring an amendment, or not an amendment, we can bring something forward in the fall if need be.
I think my intention with that is to show support for you in particular, leading the district forward on 21st century learning initiatives. And I would look forward to hearing how you're making out with that and what in-services are
But to be
going.
fair, we wanted to be true to the original spirit, which was I didn't want to come back and ask for another 100,000 when we hadn't completely finished spending the first. It seemed to be, we wanted to be honest to what we were looking for, and I'm also expecting to have some, we're expecting in August for the world to change a little bit. And so I would have a chance to be more clear about what we could use additional funding for, as that we expect to hear from the ministry some new changes. So when we added it all up, we hadn't quite spent it all for this year, so we might come back to you and say.
You weren't being Mother Christmas.
Yeah.
Corinne and then Sheila.
I think you've probably already pointed out that I wasn't at that liaison meeting, and had I been, I clearly would have supported Danny's suggestion. And that again, that I think that we had a budget process, a budget advisory committee that clearly didn't work well this year. And I have to be careful here. I don't want it to appear punitive that we give to one and not to the other. And so for me, I think it's probably better to put the position back and then have the discussion with the budget advisory committee that will be functioning fully in the fall.
Sheila and then Janice.
Well, I think that we're really doing some funny work, because I think if we'd actually let all the other schools know that we were open to being lobbied on particular little things, we might have had a little bit of money for the Councillor Lake Trail, and we would have had this, and we would have had that coming forward, and there's a whole slew of them. And if we were actually going to be equally responding to the advice that we've gotten, we might have responded to the things that the PVP rated really highly and ditched Band 7 and put in some other stuff. So what I would suggest would be more effective is that we ask we pass this budget and then ask senior management to work with the staff at Vanier to develop a business plan to make the cafeteria project self-sustaining within the budget. And if it can't be done, that they come back and ask for that position, rather than the default being that they get it and therefore have no incentive to really look at that program and see how it's working. I'm just going to note that the item I've added to the agenda, I think needs to be solved by about $50,000 additional money. Now it's moved down the agenda. I'm not going to put this on as an amendment to the budget now. I think we need to go through process. I think we have a surplus. We can come back to it. And when there's a strong difference between us supporting the items that come forward with the support of our full senior staff, and an item that, having gone through the process, I understand it has support from QP, it has support from certain other roles, but it is really being driven by the board. I think that's an inappropriate place to go. So I'm looking forward to better process in the future for sure.
Thank you. Just try to, I think we're starting to go around in circles a little bit here. Try to go for some new content if possible. I saw Janice and then Danny, unless you have something to add.
The Minister of Education just released a letter yesterday or today regarding a new program for kindergarten. My understanding is they're going to assess all kindergarten students for various on that one there. My question is, does it come with money?
No.
Okay.
No.
So,
However, to be
is that a
fair,
rhetorical
we
question?
already assessed kindergarten.
Okay, that's what I was going to
Yes,
ask
it's
you.
rhetorical.
And so we're all good. I read that and went, I'll respond in November, because we already, to be fair, what they're asking for, those benchmarks, we already do for the most part in our district, above and beyond. And if they are going to, yes, I suspect that this will cost us in the future, in that if they change what they're accepting, what they want as assessment, then we will be looking at what we were doing. But we're comfortable right now with the assessment. We're meeting the requirements in the levy.
So my concern is we do have a little bit of money to support that new initiative if that needs to be, if we pass the budget as it is. So that
There's
was,
comfort of different budgets.
okay, thank you.
Danny, then Tom.
Well, mine is relating to the Budget Advisory Committee itself, because there's a number of people that are sitting here in the room that attended all those meetings, put in a lot of time, and if the only opinion that counts is senior management, then you've wasted a whole bunch of other people's time here. So I have a concern about whether the Budget Advisory Committee is even going to work next year.
Tom?
So I won't be supporting the addition for much the same reasons that Sheila articulated. However, should I be on the downside of that vote, because the third reading requires unanimous consent to pass?
No, it actually doesn't. It's in the school act. If there's a financial thing, it can all be done in 3 evenings. That's why that piece isn't in there. Did anyone else wish to say anything? Okay, then I guess we'll proceed with reading the bylaw. I think the amended amount is, maybe Ron better say.
So insert here, 30, if you write it down, then you'll remember. 75,315,528.
Okay, so, and if it's a tie vote, then it's defeated, okay? Just for anyone thinking of abstaining. Okay, want to read? Go ahead.
Okay, I would move the School District 71 Comox Valley annual budget bylaw for 2011-2012 in the amount of $75,315,528 receive its first reading.
Seconder? Second. All those in favor? Opposed? And that is carried. Have a second reading?
I would move the School District 71 Comox Valley annual budget bylaw for 2011-2012 in the amount of $75,315,528 receive its second reading.
Have a seconder? Second. All those in favor? Oh, I should have asked. Okay, all those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Do you need me to say who voted which way?
No.
Thank you.
I would move the School District Number 71 Comox Valley annual budget bylaw for 2011-2012 in the amount of $75,315,528 receive its third and final reading.
Seconder. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? And that is carried. Thank you. Thank you very much for all your work with respect to this, and look forward to hearing early next year how the next set of processes are going to go. Thank you. So we'll move now to item H2, achievement contract.
So, Madam Chair, contained in the board pack, starting on page 11, going through to page 40, is the district achievement plan. And in my briefing note, I just covered that the fact that I just wanted to remind trustees that what's in this document is not in any way profoundly different than what I shared with you in the spring at Education Committee. As folks know, there's a requirement on behalf of the ministry that districts submit an annual achievement plan, but in 2009, of course, we were required to submit a 4-year plan. And so this plan actually yearly, then we have just basically been submitting the chunks year by year inside the big plan. And though I had got originally, in my naivety as a new superintendent, I had got quite excited originally in the spring about perhaps writing an achievement plan that was different, that would be, would demonstrate information differently, that would be, do they think you watch these things in the ministry?
Concise?
Concise, more relevant, more practical, all of those things. I had all of this excitement in my naivety. What I heard in the past couple of months is that I might as well have stuck with the original plan for 1 more year, because we've heard very clearly from the superintendents of achievement, who I am accountable to in terms of educational leadership, that they said just don't do anything different. Do 1 more year under the same umbrella, because we're going to change it all. The template, how you report, how you do it, so you can get all excited and create something new, and it won't be what we want anyway. And in August, I'm expecting, as I go on the 16th through the 20th to the superintendent's conference, we'll be getting more details about what the achievement plan expectations will be. So what you have in front of you is, using the official district achievement plan template, is something that actually fits under this year, under the umbrella from Dr. Tinney, which was the document that takes us from the balcony to the floor. So this is your reporting simply on 1 year and our expectations for next year. And as you, of course, you remember, I was required to do a mid-year report, which we discussed in, I think it was February or March in Education Committee. And so most of the information that you've read so faithfully and memorized would look entirely familiar to you because it is contained for the most part in the achievement update that I gave you in March and that we discussed with Education Committee. So what you have in front of you are that summarizes the key target benchmarks that we are required. The ministry does require that we set benchmarks. We got away with it, with not setting percentage benchmarks. Most districts across the province, as included in the balcony to floor document that Superintendent Tinney did. But we all got taught. Got an interesting email from the Superintendent of Achievement in May that reminded us all that we needed to actually have concrete percentage benchmarks, which was good because we actually spent quite a lot of time talking about what those were, and we went purposely through the document. And so where you will see benchmarks of improvement of 7% or 5%, we really considered the cohort that benchmark might apply to, for example, the marks in English 10 or the FSA scores, as simply a photograph of FSA. I have to be able to say the word and know that it is simply a benchmark photograph snapshot. It's not the only assessment that we use, but the ministry requires that we report on FSA, so I feel like I have to apologize that it's in the document, but that's one of the indicators that I must report on. And what we are saying to the ministry consistently, and have been here in the Valley for 2 years and across the province and in my life as a superintendent at the provincial level, is that increasingly the FSA scores are unreliable because the nature of the FSA assessment has been tainted by the use of the assessment. And so because we have decreasing numbers of students participating in FSA, it's becoming unreliable. And so though it is required by the ministry to report on it, and I've done that, otherwise something happens to me, I'm not sure what happens to me as a superintendent, but if we report on it because we use it, but we use it understanding that it's data that has changed significantly. It used to be historically reliable, and it is no longer reliable because we don't have the numbers of students participating regularly, like in grade 4 and then again in grade 7, so you can see the progress. When as things have changed around FSA, we have less students participating in it, and they certainly don't participate in it over time in a meaningful way. So it's in the document because it needs to be in the document, and I would say to you that we don't rely on it in any more way, shape, or form as we look at it as a valid, at that moment in time, snapshot with the kids who participate. We go into those believing that they're giving us their best efforts and that teachers have prepared them for the FSA as much as they can, and we look at it for that. But we use other documents much more significantly, like DART, like benchmarks, all of those things, because it's changed. So we're hoping that it dies and goes away, and that we are allowed to use different forms of assessment for the ministry. So before you is this document. I'm asking for you to endorse it. That's what you are required to do. Not to pass it or not. It's meant to be endorsed as it's presented, and it is a year's summation of work and our projected goals for the future, for next year. And then I expect that I will be before you this time next year with a very different plan and a very different document. Before I leave that, I just wanted to say, just to give you a little bit of information about the process. We were very fortunate. We had district teacher leaders involved in the process. We had district principals involved in the process, and the senior staff to my left here did a fabulous job in constructing this document with me. So I didn't write it by myself.
Thank you. So before we move to the motion, does anyone have any comments or questions? Janet?
It was a really good read. I enjoyed reading it during my time off work. We'll leave it at that. I have a couple of questions and comments. One is, I did notice our grad rate has actually gone up. We're not quite provincial average, but I noticed the last 2 years that we're creeping up there, and I think that's a lot of the good work that you guys do. But I did notice some discrepancies regarding the Math 10 between Term 1 and Term 2. And when I looked at Term 1, I had this whoa moment. And I looked at the end, and it was, okay, it's not too bad, but I just was wondering about that, that discrepancy. And the other one was regarding the band unit participation is only 50%, where it's filled 64 and Highland and 59. So that number kind of gave me, well, okay, that's like our largest secondary school, but only 50% participation. So I wonder, those are just two discrepancies that I'm just wondering if maybe you guys can sort of, let me know what's going on.
I'll ask Sheila Shadman to,
Okay.
through you, Madam Chair. Thank you for looking at the data.
So,
I like all this data. Thank you for looking at it. First of all, I can talk about math. 2 new, brand new math courses this year. So when you saw the first piece that we put in, which was Appendix C, it was our first one at taking report card grades from Term 1 in those 2 new courses. And included here because we did some significant work around bringing district teachers together just to talk about not only the curriculum, but the new learning outcomes, and actually the work that had been done the prior year in directing students to an appropriate math course and communication with parents. And so the group did some significant work around looking at teaching strategies, those sorts of pieces, and sharing with each other what was working and what wasn't. And the thing about this data, too, is there's actually a school that isn't offering one of the courses yet. So it is certainly just a snapshot of report cards that was provided for teachers to do some work with. What happens basically is we had provincial exams written at the end of January, and the schools have had their results, but they have not yet aggregated as district results. But I did include what's called the cognitive level reports for those 2 brand new courses which were written in January. And you can see that in terms of the skill levels that are measured in those 2 reports on 38 and 39, that our students actually are doing well compared to their counterparts in the province at the end of the first semester. And the work still continues. I think math work continues from K to 12 right now. But those were the first very pilot years of 2 brand new courses. We'll have the same situation with grade 11 next year as those courses move forward, and an additional course called Pre-Calculus 11. So they actually stretch into 3 courses. So we will monitor this data to see how our students are doing, and of course staff have a look at the results as well. So we will very shortly get our aggregated district data. We usually get it late August. It's been later this year, actually. August is late. We usually have it by now, but I thought I would include that because it is just a point in time. So we were pleased to see that on the provincial exam, the students, of course, are within range on all of those skill levels with their counterparts in the province. But I know that meeting with the teachers again tomorrow, we will be looking at final report cards again and comparing them to November to see how groups of students have done. So thank you for noticing that. In terms of our grad rate, it's interesting. We, over the last, I believe, since about 2008, have been significantly below provincial average. And I know that Jordan Tinney was looking at and provided us with a look at our grad rate without out-of-district students, because we have such a large distributed learning program. We have a lot of students who come to us who may have struggled in whatever subject matter they were taking in other districts. And so we were basically disaggregating that to actually look at our grad rate for just our district. You see on page 40 basically a dogwood completion that actually shows you our standard schools are really typically at 4% completion for our regular schools. And so it obviously and naturally is our alternate programs that sort of have an influence on our grad rate. So again, it's looking at the number and knowing that there are ways that we could improve. Last year was a year when there was a very significant piece of work done at the secondaries that continues around identifying students early in the year who may be at risk of not completing their courses or not graduating. And I congratulate the schools on the work that they've done. So let's hope that we continue to see those sorts of implications in our graduation rate. Participation. Pardon me? Participation rate. So what was the third? Did I miss the
well,
third
it was on
part?
page 37, participation rate, where I see Banyu 50%, ISFO 64, Allen was 59.
Yes.
And I was just,
so this was a piece of data that we collected, just brand new, to have a look at our sense of belonging, knowing that we value the community piece for secondary students, because a lot of who they are and how they connect to their school is directly related to the things that they have an opportunity to participate in. And so this is our very early look at what the participation was based on 4 specific types of activities that are offered after school. It does not reflect curricular offerings. So, for example, if band is out of the timetable, it would be considered if band or fine arts are in the timetable. So it's not apples to apples. I think what it is it's looking at over time, kind of celebrating actually the amount of students that participate and trying to make a new benchmark. So it's because it's brand new data, we don't have anything to compare it to. And I think it would be unfair to compare the schools one to the other because of the nature of how we determine what is extracurricular and what isn't. If that makes sense.
Thanks for
So
clarification.
we can really, I think we should really congratulate the high schools on the amount of participation in, these are totally community building after hours. So, we wanted to provide that for them as a sense of celebration, but also to give them a benchmark for the very first time so that we can look at that in the future and have that as a guideline around building sense of belonging, building community. Does that help?
That clarifies it, thank you. I agree with you 100% on that.
I think it's worth mentioning, too, that all of those extracurricular activities that are taking place, that staff is actually volunteering their time to do that. That's not part of their employment contracts. And so when I look at Vanier, that's 700 kids are participating in something that teachers are donating their time for. I think that's really speaks volumes about the quality of people we have in our district. Anyone else have a comment or question? Sheila?
There's a bit of a discrepancy somehow between those figures and the ones on page 12 where we look at the secondary school question, do you participate in activities outside of class hours, and come up with a 39% agree in grade 12 as a target of 45, so there's somehow a...
Some of them will participate more than that.
Yeah, okay. So that particular issue for me and my sense of belonging and those issues are of big concern for me around a couple of decisions that the district's made, and ones which I'm hoping we would see some real evaluation of what the impacts have been of those decisions, and some thinking about whether we need to be able to offer more choice for kids in terms of having being in situations where they can have that belonging and participation, or moderating the impacts. And the two things are, today I went to the year-end assembly at Hornby Island, and I looked at the grade 7s who have had an amazing experience there, and their sense of belonging, not just to their school, but through the school curriculum this year to their island and community, and to think of them being at Vanier next year, where they will be grade 8s amongst a mass. And so those issues here where you've set some goals about establishing clear and supportive transition plans and being proactive strategies for kids to feel belonging, the decision to move the island kids to directly to Vanier, I still persist in believing that letting the kids make that choice might not necessarily have been best for their achievement and for meeting targets, and that perhaps some review should be. And the other is about the move of the grade 10s to from Cumberland and Lake Trail. I note with interest that Lake Trail participation rate is showing 78% of students in at least one activity. I attended their year-end. The sense of belonging, the connection with teachers there, fabulous experience for those kids. I'm particularly interested in us looking closely at what has been the impact on grade 9s and 10s who are now attending Vanier, the numbers there, the shift in their ability to participate in sports teams. There were a number of alarm bells that were raised when the decision was made. I think we need to really look at them and come up with strategies either to reintroduce choice for kids who would work better in smaller schools, or both. Increase the way programming is done so that instead of being 25 kids get on the grade 8 team out of 300 as opposed to 25 got on the grade 8 team out of 40 kids. We've had some impacts directly on participation opportunity sense of belonging, and how that translates into success. And I think we need to look at it, and I don't think we've done it yet. So I'm hoping in the coming year you'll find ways, whether it's through comparing the control groups, their success rates, comparing satisfaction surveys, somehow find a way to really say what's happened and what do we need to address.
Any other comments or questions? Well, I'd like to make a comment. No surprise there. Same idea as what Sheila has said there with respect to the participation rates in things at schools, but perhaps a different twist. I wonder if the difference in participation rates, or that middle school kids are now at secondary school and they're feeling more disconnected from their school. So it would be an interesting question to look at. So, but with respect to the report in general, I like to borrow a term coined by a guy called Michael Kendrick and say that I guess we've arrived at the Ministry of Education's annual bureaucratic moment, where we need to convey that planning and learning is taking place in our district. They've asked us to prepare reports in the past in a number of different ways for various different periods of time, and in spite of the changing reports, yearly we find out that actually there's some pretty cool things going on in our school, and especially with respect to 21st century learning things, I think, that we do read in your report, Sherry, a large number of things that are happening. But if that isn't enough, actually we read weekly in our newspapers about all of the amazing things that go on in our schools. And I would just like to say that in the past few weeks, I'm going to read the list of all the things I've read about. Highlands students receiving their tourism certification, Vanier's Chris Leclerc winning gold at the National Skills Canada competitions, kids successfully starting apprenticeships in our high schools. I see that not only did Vanier do their first ever lip dub, but their drama students are using theater to explore real world issues. By reading the papers, I learned that Highland Interact and the Isfeld Interact clubs have both been working with Strathcona Sunrise Rotary and Comox Rotary to raise money for the relief effort in Japan and for educational and medical care for kids in Honduras. I've read that 6 kids from our alternate programs graduated from Glacier View Learning Center this year, which is pretty cool. I'm pretty sure that a few years ago maybe those kids might not have graduated. And I also have read that young mums can still continue to go to school at Vanier because of their choices of on-site daycare. There's yet another story about the Cumberland Marching Band. Also stories about a successful NIDES showcase at silent auction. We've got a thriving Roots of Empathy program going in our district, despite ministry funding challenges in the past. And I see that the kids at Brooklyn are taking sailing lessons. So those are all things that I've read in the newspapers in the last 3 weeks, and I think it's pretty clear from what I read in the community and hear in the community and see in the achievement contract that there's a lot of planning and there's a lot of achieving going on, and I think it's pretty cool. So,
Thank you, Madam Chair.
thank you.
It really goes, it's a testimony to the quality of the professionals we have in the classrooms and outside the classrooms that maintain our buildings, and at some point in time we play a small part in that in terms of planning and organization, but it doesn't happen without amazing kids in classrooms, parents that support them, and staff there to guide them. And that's really where it comes from. When there's energy and commitment in classrooms and schools, led by parents and staff and administrators, and wonderful kids get opportunities, they always shine every time, every single time.
So I'll happily play my part in the annual bureaucratic moment and endorse the report. Anyone else? Okay, anyone like to put the motion?
Second.
Okay, any further discussion? Jen?
The one group of people we tend not to honor at our board meetings, I'm not going to make an honor tonight, is our support staff, the QP grounds people, the secretaries, and Deb at the front desk, and we talk about the teachers and how we do that. There's also those people, keeping the schools clean, the grounds clean and safe for our kids to play, and the receptionists. So I'd like to acknowledge them too, because without them, a lot of the stuff that Trustee Barr was talking about wouldn't also help too. So we have a great staff, right from get-go to top. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, all those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you. And we'll go to the literacy plan, which is, where is it? Item 8. H8. Page 56.
Chair, I'll direct that to the superintendent. Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, my briefing note is on page 56. It's a pleasure to work in a community group that works on literacy. I inherited it in its third year. Literacy is now funding. This was the last final year for the current funding window. We've had a very significant group on the steering committee and in the community providing opportunities for people of all ages to promote literacy and to have opportunities. So if you turn to page 67, you can see on pages 67 and 68 the size of the group that comes together, the larger group twice a year. And of course, even though they come together to meet, those are certainly folks who are providing service in our community, participating in things like Family Literacy Day. And then the smaller group at the top, which are the steering committee. The report is prepared, co-written by Daniel Hoogland and myself. Danielle has been our literacy outreach coordinator for the past 3 years. The group will continue. They have enough funds left to carry forward into the next year and hope to gain nonprofit organization status in the fall. Very committed group of community people that bring themselves together every month. And we're still hopeful that there may yet be some funding from the ministry. There has not been an announcement yet. There is a non-profit that is certainly supported philosophically and in terms of its vision by the ministry, but I don't believe that the ministry will think that organization will be able to do this solely on their own. So it may not become totally out of the ministry's hands, so we're waiting for that announcement. And I think some of the submission of some of the plans will certainly influence, I hope, the ministry again to continue with their funding for this particular piece. The funds are brought to the community and they're hosted at the Vancouver Island Regional Library, and then the steering committee has made decisions about the expenditures of those funds. And the ministry money is basically for the coordinator, so that there is someone in the Comox Valley who's doing that coordination. And there is a small amount that goes to the coordinator on Hornby Island as well. So I would submit the plan. You need to know that the goals are strong goals. You saw some presentations from both sides here a couple of months ago, from the essential skills focused on youth and adults, and from the vulnerable and isolated families through the Family Literacy Outreach Activity Committee. So those are the two projects that will carry on, as well as, of course, supporting things like Little Learners and some of the very specific programs in the community that go through either regular grants or mini grants from that community. So it's really a valuable community and district connection.
Thank you. Any comments or questions? Fran?
One of the facts that jumped out at me was that in terms of adult learners, that the number of adults accessing secondary courses has increased so dramatically because of tuition-free availability, and the number going from 105 adults in 2006 to 1,442 in 2010. So are there any negative funding implications that associated with that?
There's always the question of funding in that regard. It's called the Education Guarantee. It's a different funding pot that comes to us for those particular adults. It was paid this year. and there's been no announcement that it isn't continuing.
So do things balance out?
In terms of this particular funding has nothing to do with that number of adults. Those adults are actually funded through the ministry separately for their course registrations. So that is not having an impact on early learning. It's a totally separate pot that the ministry provides for adults who wish to continue with their coursework. So no, it's not having a negative impact elsewhere, unless in a future budget decision the ministry would look at what do we raise, where do we put our dollars, but they haven't indicated that that's going to change. Thanks.
Anyone else? Okay, someone like to put the motion?
I move that the board approve the draft report as the version that will be sent to the Ministry of Education as presented.
Second? Any further discussion? All those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you. Okay, so we've dealt with our displaced items, so we'll go back to the beginning of the agenda here under old business, the Stacey Holloway report. So trustees Caton and Weber were both not at the board meeting where this report was discussed, and you haven't contacted me to find out what transpired. I know Janice, who came in at the tail end, so I thought probably it would be best to recap for you now what happened with the report.
So point of order, Madam Chair.
I'd just like to continue with this so I can introduce this item properly. It was the first time that the board had actually spoken about the report, and we had Stacey teleconferenced in for about 50 minutes so she could answer questions about the report. And after that, the board essentially made two decisions. One decision was that we all agreed that the report should be released in its entirety to the public, and that Sherry and I would coordinate that. And we also determined that the board could not deal with a whole report such as this magnitude within the few months that we have left together. And so Sherry was tasked to send a survey out to us to see what topics we would like to perhaps talk about between now and November. So with respect to the press release, I prepared the first draft of the press release. I sent it to Sherry to be reviewed, and she made a few changes to it. Then Sherry and Corrine and I, we met with the reporters from the Echo and the Record. We posted the paper to the report to the website and solicited feedback, and I believe that we notified partner groups that the report was on the website. Is that correct? Okay. So, and all of this was done pretty much consistently with the board's direction and our existing policy on communications. Clearly, a minority of trustees wanted their personal perspectives out there, and they went directly to the press. That is their right, but they were expressing their minority opinion and not that of the board. So I would just like to know, Debbie, did we received an email from you today where you said that we had received 2 pieces of feedback with respect to the report? Did we receive any more? No. Okay, so 2. And then Sherry, I thought that maybe you could have a discussion here about what your survey results were, and then we would just move to, someone could make a motion to go to committee of the whole so we could have a discussion with respect to this.
So, Madam Chair, I, with Jeff Taylor's help, of course, created a survey, an anonymous survey for the board and senior management to reflect on your comment at the press conference was that we could perhaps move ahead and address some of these issues, but and agreeably there was not enough time to address them all. So people were surveyed and asked to choose 2 topics that were currently contained in the Holloway report, which they would commit to working on with a larger group, which would be the board and senior management. And clearly so there were the 4 topics, which were governance, role and responsibility of the board chair, codes of conduct, or the operational review / procurement process. And then there was a final question on the survey, which was, I do not want to engage in these topics at this time. And clearly, there were 13 surveys completed out of the possible 15. And the topic that gathered the most feedback that people would be committed to working to was the role and responsibility of the board chair. And the next actual clear winner in terms of feedback was people who answered the question number 2. Their second choice was, I do not want to engage in these topics at this time. So clearly, the one topic that if the board chose to work towards with senior management would be the role and responsibility of the board chair.
Okay, so how would you see us proceeding with that discussion?
I would suggest that as we move into the fall, that we would meet at either liaison or in camera. I think that it's important that we have a chance to address there's a pretty significant number of folks who said they didn't want to engage at all. We need to have a pretty open and honest conversation about what that could look like and gather feedback whether or not the the choice of topics that's been brought forward, which is the role and responsibility of the board chair, would be something that people would want to continue to work on, perhaps just share that. And then we would design a process, I think quite reasonably so, quite easy to do, where we would work through that particular topic, and we could come to some consensus about what we currently have, which is in the board bylaws and the processes, and if that's adequate, if it's appropriate, if there's anything that needs to be added to that or deleted from that, and then we would look at taking, I have a vision of something that looking at what we currently have, looking at whether or not we need to add or delete, and then what does that look like when it's working, and delegate some action to make sure that we know that it's working, and then some kind of review or evaluation process.
Okay. So there's the report on what's transpired to date. So if we need to have a further discussion with regards to the report in general, someone could maybe make a motion now for us to move into committee of the whole so we can sort of have a more free-flowing discussion.
Point of order.
Yep.
Seeing this committee of the whole on the agenda earlier, I took the time to read Robert's rules on it, and the committee of the whole appears to be quite a cumbersome procedure and perhaps inappropriate. There are two other choices, and one is called to move into a quasi-committee of the whole, and the other is just to move to have an informal discussion. According to Robert's rules, the committee of the whole would require you to step down as chair because you would later be ruling on any recommendations coming forward from the committee of the whole to the board, and that the committee of the whole, it was a complicated process, and I wonder whether it's really the appropriate one.
My intention is that we can have a more free-flowing discussion here. There won't be, with respect to this section, and we were going to have the motion on the next section after this, but that we would have a more free-flowing discussion with respect to the report, and that we wouldn't be confined by the formalities of there's a motion and people speaking to it.
That might be solved by moving to have an informal discussion that waives the limits on the amount of time or number of times people can speak, and but in the end is not quite so cumbersome in terms of establishing and going in and out of that process. If a motion is made, then you're immediately back into formal discussion on that motion.
Well, we could get bogged down with the discussion on the legalities of this, or I'm just wondering, are people okay with having a more informal discussion with respect to this, and we'll just do that now as long as there's something procedurally wrong with that?
You can do that. You could do that, or you could do as Trustee McDonald suggests. You will need to. Committee of the whole will allow free-forward discussion without motions, without all the requirements, as you say. You need to rise and report out of committee of the whole, and when you rise and report out of committee of the whole, you would need to then determine some kind of further action. That's usually where a motion would come forward. So as long as you're prepared to rise out and report about what your intention about that issue is from then on in, then you're fine to go to committee of the whole. You can't go to committee of, we wouldn't recommend that Robert's rules doesn't necessarily allow you to go to committee of the whole and then end the informal discussion and then do nothing or say nothing. Otherwise, that should have been an in-camera discussion or something else. So as long as you're prepared to rise out and report, you can use that methodology, or you could do something as Sheila talks about, an informal discussion.
So what is the pleasure of the board? Like I say, my intention is that we don't get bogged down with a legalistic discussion here, that we could just proceed to chat about this. Is there anyone opposed to just chatting about this now?
I would like to have an informal board conversation.
Okay, anyone opposed to what Janice is requesting here? Okay, then we'll just go ahead with that. So who would like to say something? Tom.
Well, I'd like to, first of all, acknowledge the tremendous amount of work Stacey Holloway did with all of us, so that's the board and senior management, inclusive, over a substantially long period of time. And I think that I feel that she's done a nice job in capturing the issues that the board faces. I think it's timing is what timing is. The length of our term is only 3 years, and when we spend a substantial chunk of it engaged in this process, it doesn't leave I think as we've discussed and has been said, it doesn't leave tremendous windows of opportunity to address the issues that have been raised. I think many of the conversations were exceedingly challenging for us to have. They challenged some individuals more than others, and I commend everybody around the table for sticking with it. So I'm pleased that the decision was made that this be made public in its entirety, and I think provides the public with a good view as to the functionings of the board.
Anyone else have anything they would like to say? Sheila?
I'm a bit concerned to hear from Sherry that there was not a particular appetite to proceed more with the report on the issue of governance, because I think that the recommendations that Stacey made were very good, and that we, I think that there's a nice fit between some of them in, when she's talking about ensuring a multi-year strategic plan, and that we look at governance issues, and that we go through a process of reading the documents she provided, some of which are code of conduct related, and some of which, and that we go through a process of looking at them. Particular foundational principles of effective governance, to me, really sums up helping the board understand what its role is, how that fits with strategic planning, how it fits with achievement, how then meetings then work in the districts conducted. And I feel, having done the process with her, having received this material from her, that I don't want it to be put in an icebox or a file 13 somewhere, but that we work through it and we look at it, whether that's in the context of policy committee or effective governance committee, but we really use the advice that came, and that is then passed on to an incoming board next year. The district operates with, I think, some old governance and some new governance, and so there has been many advances since 1978 when some of our procedures were put in place, and it would be really helpful to use the benefit of Stacey's report and the knowledge, the degree to which she is up on this and has been able to bring something to us, and that we use it and we do something with it. So I'm hoping that that people will, having read it first when we first got it, I really hope everybody will read it again, put it under your pillows and read it a lot over the summer, and then that we come back and do some work with it, with the material she put together for us about best practices in governance and the importance of our common goal and being focused on that and working to get there. I think there's a lot in it that we need to use. We need to work on it, and we need to not just file it.
Anyone else? Janice?
So I actually rather appreciated, I thank Stacey for the report. I think it was a true document of the relationship between the board, senior management, how this district reflects is running. So I think it's fact verbatim what's actually happening. Over the past few months, there's been a lot of hearsay comments and innuendos, which I think this document also allayed to. I did not go to the press as stated by the board chair this evening. The press approached me and asked my opinion. I have the right to do that. And I think the information that needs to be out there should be truthful and not speculative. And I think that's one of the issues we've gotten ourselves into, so I appreciate this report. I was actually at part of that meeting where that conversation was discussed, asked to release the report. So I was partake of the conversation. I was also aware that we as a board came to the conclusion regarding a press release and some information around that, which did not happen. I was also surprised to find out a surprise press conference. I was asked to answer that honestly, in which I did, and I have the right to do that. I also think this document is I call it a a good working document. I guess it was a little bit shocking to me that we have to be told how to behave as trustees. And that's why I read this document. And we should know what our roles are, and we should be respectful in how we deal with our roles with senior management. And I believe this document will be a stepping forward, new beginning, where we get off to a positive start. We have a positive relationship. I think this district is immensely well served by a wonderful senior management team. I think that we're all here for the right reason. I think we need to work together to support each other in getting that way. I have no qualms with respect to the document. I think Stacey gave some excellent recommendations. It's whether we take the initiative to follow those recommendations and move forward. That's try and tell. I think that is, do we read this document, agree with the recommendations and move forward, or what do we do with the next step? And that will be the turning point, I believe, for this board, is what do we do next, and how do we proceed in moving forward in a positive manner and having a positive relationship with our senior management team and staff, and so some of this doesn't have to go through the grapevine again. So I'm quite pleased with it. I think that did a lot of heart soling on it. I believe that she hit the nail on the head in a few recommendations, and I think that we need to take that to heart. And I think we own up to our shortcomings is a positive thing. It's nothing to say that we've to say you're perfect and not agree that you've done mistakes, to me, is wrong. We've all made mistakes, and I think that if we can own up to our mistakes and move forward, I think we're better for it. I think this district is better for it also. So it is what we make of it, and I'm proud of the work we've done as a group with our senior management team, and I'm proud to be working with Stacey, and I have no regrets at all of working together with her and moving forward. And that's my 2 cents on the matter.
Can I just ask you to clarify something? You just said something about hearing something through the grapevine. What do you mean by grapevine here?
Pardon me.
You just in your commentary there said something about hearing something through the grapevine.
The grapevine was, apparently there was a press conference called by the board chair, the vice chair, and the superintendent I knew nothing about till after the fact. That's what I mean by hearing through the grapevine, is that I find out not from the board chair, the vice chair, that you've held a press conference. I held it from the community. That's why I heard about the grapevine. And that's where I think that we as the board need to stop that, because I think we need to have more respect for each other and hear that. I don't want to hear secondhand that you've done something.
Okay. Anyone else? Fran?
To echo a lot of what Sheila was saying, I think it's disappointing that there was such a large survey response of people not interested in discussing further. I think that's the most disappointing aspect of this all. And also disappointed that there was no appetite to pursue, which we're aware of, a pet interest of mine, the code of conduct. Particularly as interpersonal issues are apparent and have been referenced in this report. I find it extremely ironic that there isn't the appetite to explore resolving some of those by way of code of conduct.
Did you have your hand up, Sheila?
I did, because one of the issues that I did have a bit of concern with, I think like Janice, was about the release, because the motion that was passed about releasing the report, which I'm entirely supportive of us being transparent. I don't think it ever has done us any good not to be. Was that the superintendent and chair would work on that, and there was an amendment that the trustees would be notified, and I believe that amendment, as we were talking about it, was that we would have prior notice. We would have a chance to see the press release. And it's not reflected in the minutes, but, that was in there. And what happened in this case, and it ties in again with the board's role and how you as the chair, or the role of the board chair, how you are our spokesperson, but it also needs to be based in us knowing what you're going to say and that it's decisions we've made. What happened, as I understand it, is that there was a Freedom of Information request. There were 2 Freedom of Information requests for this report. I don't know what the process on those.
Could I just ask how you know that?
Well, because we talked about them.
We did? When?
Yeah. We did, because after this was happening. So So there were requests, and I don't really know what the process is, but I was told, and on the Saturday, we had a meeting during the week, and on the Saturday, I learned that if there's a request for freedom of information, that report should not be released to the public while there's a request for freedom of information. I was immediately leaving to go to Vancouver for the weekend, but I believe that somebody else who was aware of this got in touch, sent an email saying, we can't release this report right away because we might be bringing ourselves into breach.
Okay, I think we need to probably stop right here, do we? Do we need to go in camera for a minute, Sherry?
I think that I could say that there are two schools of legal thought on that issue. There is nothing within the Act, the 45 Act, that talks about it, and there are two legal schools of thought about whether, and it was one ruling, and if you recall, at the time, I was putting on my new Secretary-Treasurer hat, and so I did actually seek legal advice about that, and the advice I got that was that part, there's two schools of thought. You can choose to accept the one ruling as it went to, as a piece of case law that you want to follow, or you can accept that that was one case and there hasn't been enough precedent to believe that could change your practice, and historically that's not been a practice at all. So I did seek legal advice, and because I was conscious about not putting us in difficulty.
Okay, great.
Can I just ask a further clarifying question here with respect to process on this?
Yes.
To Sherry with regards to how FOI requests are fulfilled. In particular, this one, was the board involved with this FOI request in any way? Was any one trustee, including the board chair, involved with this in any one way?
Actually, no. To be fair, I was going to say just me. It was the Secretary-Treasurer began the process, and then I finished it. So it was just the Secretary-Treasurer and myself involved in the FOIs, both requests.
And as I advised you before with respect to Sheila, if you have a concern with respect to that, I think that this is not the forum actually to discuss this. You need to have a conversation apart from a public board meeting regarding this. So I hope that you will...
I think the point is the concern about potential risk because the need to feedback to the trustees wasn't in place. The process moved very quickly.
Are you speaking about the FOI release?
I'm speaking about the release of the report and the press conference.
Okay. That's a different thing than the FOI. Okay, thank you.
It tied in with the timing in a way which might have put us at something.
Okay, well, I think that it's probably a good idea that we have a discussion with respect to the role of the board chair because these things are, I believe, in our policy within the purview of the board chair. And to be honest with you, I've received some criticism from a minority of trustees with respect to how I carry out this role. And frankly, I'm tired of it. I'm glad that we're going to have an opportunity, at least before we're finished in November, to have a discussion about this and have some meaningful recommendations come forward to see how people think it should be changed, because I have not received any recommendations with respect to that yet in 2.5 years. So does anyone have anything else that they wish to say with respect to the report, Green?
I'll also echo what Fran and Sheila both said in regards that it is kind of disappointing that it seems a large number of people don't want to discuss at this time the recommendations that were made, because a lot of the recommendations were made based on her own information, discussions that none of us ever had, including things like the role of the board chair and governance. We never got to those conversations. And they're important conversations to have. And I'm hoping that the reason people don't want to engage in it is because they see that there isn't a whole lot of time left to get to that sort of thing, and that things do seem to be moving along quite nicely in the district. We've heard from Susan a bunch of the good things that have been going on in the district, and I have the great pleasure of actually having leisure time because I'm a stay-at-home parent, and I get to go into the schools and actually engage and see what's going on in our district, and I can say firsthand that there are wonderful, wonderful things going on in this district. And so I'm hoping But the reason no one has the appetite is because of the time issue and because things are going along. And it's interesting when you read these reports that each and every one of us will get a different perspective out of this. And so for me, it's a snapshot in time, and a lot of the things that she refers to with regards to relationships, for example, are things that existed, for me at least, at one point in time, and that I have moved beyond a lot of these things, and I actually think that, from my point of view, relationships are working pretty well. And for me, the evidence, again, is that things are working here, and many of the motions that we pass at this table, we do so unanimously, and that we can carry on conversations about differing things, whether it's budget or achievement contracts or whatever it may be. We can do that in a civilized manner. And, I'm with Fran. A code of conduct, Stacy recommended it. Almost every organization that I know of has a code of conduct, including many of our schools, including the military, it's just a document in place so that people have something to refer to when, they need to, when they need. I guess we'll just leave it at that. So for me, there are some good things in this document. There are some things that I believe we've moved beyond. And there are some things that I think we should have the conversations on because we haven't had those conversations. That's what I have to say.
Thanks. Anyone else? Okay, well, before we move on, there's just one thing that I would like to raise with you. In the report, Stacy talks about an official trustee and a special advisor being appointed to the district. And so I was curious in our discussions at our last meeting about why that was there. And I asked her if she could clarify that, if she was saying that this is something that should happen. And so she said that if our relationships were conflictual and interfering with the work of the board, and in particular student achievement, and that was a quote, then we should go to the minister and request a special advisor or an official trustee. And my read of the School Act is that advice would be consistent with what is in the School Act and remedies available to any board or member of the public, and so we could access that at any time. So I'm just wondering, we've just endorsed our achievement contract, we've passed our budget. No one has really expressed huge concerns that our plans are resulting in any poor student achievement, and I'm therefore concluding that we're not at a place where anyone feels we need an official trustee or a special advisor. And I'm wondering if I could check with trustees on that right now, because there's really not much point in going further with this work if someone feels that this is what we need. So I'm wondering if I could solicit your thoughts on this. Anyone feel we need this?
I think I'm on record saying we don't.
Okay. Anyone feel that this is something that's required? Okay. So I think that we could now move to the next piece. If someone wants to put the motion, they can go ahead. Did you want to put it?
Please. So I'll make a motion that a full and independent review is undertaken to examine the conduct of School District 71 school trustees in the development and carrying out the School District 71 operational review. The final report and any recommendations will be made public.
Second motion.
Okay. Tom, do you want to open debate?
So I'll open debate, but I'll save my substantive comments to close. This motion is my fault. I'm to blame for it. It is not something that Stacey Holloway crafted, even though it's in her report. I did initially in December try to bring this matter forward to a public discussion in a public forum at a public meeting, but that did not happen. So it's been kind of hanging out there, and I'm pleased that that Stacy in her recommendation suggested that we do talk about it. It was certainly something that was and has been an issue for us as a board. It's something that we've talked about and struggled with and debated at this table. It's certainly something that members of the public have expressed an interest in. And the last thing that I'll say at this point, before any comments that I make to close, is When I committed to running for school trustee, the only promise that I made was to do my best to be open and accountable. I didn't actually promise anything about making the best decisions all the time, because I couldn't guarantee that. I didn't make any promises about Band 7 or any other thing that we may or may not have done. I take that part fairly seriously, and I mean, it's the same thing that I'm going to promise this November. But my interest in bringing it forward is that it allows us to have an independent examination of work that the board has participated in, and all of us are culpable in that. All of us except Sheila McDonald, who had the fortune or misfortune to join after the operational review and the circumstances that led up to it. But we all have a role to play in it, and had a role to play in it. I think that it would be exceedingly useful in the spirit of full transparency to allow somebody to come in who is independent, who is not consumed by individual perspectives that we all have of what coulda, woulda, shoulda did happen, to provide an open account for our actions. I think as public officials, even though we are sort of at the low end of the elected officials, we, in my view, should not be held to any substantially different standard than city councilors or mayors or MLAs or MPs. And I'll stop at that.
Just would like to encourage you to say more now if you would like, because the purpose of this debate is for us to persuade each other of different perspectives and to hear what we have to say. And if you don't sort of put your cards on the table now, we won't have an opportunity in our comments to comment on what you have to say and ask for clarification when you go to close. So just for you to consider that and ask if you did want to make any further comments at this time, or if you would just like to reserve it for later.
Just reserve, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Janice?
I also support this motion. Like Tom, when I ran for trustee, I ran on the premise of transfer and accountability to the public, and I would like to run November on the same premise. This is a cloud hanging over the head of this board, and I think it needs to be resolved. There's a lot of unknowns and a lot of questions out there. I get asked a lot of questions from the public. I don't have the answers. I believe this will end it once and for all, and we can move forward. I think it's time to move forward. It's taken enough of our time away from the good that we should be doing as a board. I think it's imperative that we put it to bed one way or the other. I also believe with the release of the FOI, where I was privy to some emails I didn't know that I was unaware of prior to the FOI, and my comment, I did not know that, I think leads to some of that issue over the transparency and accountability. So I support the motion. I would like to put this issue to bed. It's time to move on, and this will end it once and for all, in my opinion, in a positive manner, my thinking. So I support the motion.
Anyone else? Fran and then Sheila?
I think that this board has spent a disproportionate amount of resources in terms of both time and money repeating and re-repeating, and I'm sure that's not really a word, the facts associated with this operational review process. I truly don't think that there's anything else to find. I don't think we should be spending more money for this purpose. I think the cost of a truly qualified individual to conduct an independent review would be tens of thousands of dollars more. I don't think it's warranted in these circumstances. I think, personally, we've already spent more than I think it made sense to in our various attempts to deal with situations complicated by interpersonal issues, which I've alluded to before. I think it's time to finish with this, and I do think that having an independent review will not be a way to finish with this. I also think, I'd also like to state that by not supporting this, I'm certainly not against transparency or accountability or openness. And I think that there's a balance of common sense and allocation of resources in context and really examining what we're talking about and whether we want to throw more money at this and time and energy and focus. And I think that's what we've been focusing on and refocusing on. Just to add another read to the mix. That's it.
You have your hand up, Sheila?
Yeah. I agree that it would be nice to move on from this issue, but I think I feel that the one way to really do it is to have this review. It's not a public hearing or anything like that. It is a review, and it's a place where if there's nothing was wrong, or in looking at the documentation around it, then it's set for if there are any issues where there should be consequences, then it's in the public and those consequences can occur. And I think it's something that it doesn't really go away. And we've learned a great deal in terms of the handling of it. I mean, but the amounts of explanations and the gradual release of information hasn't done the district any favor, and I do support us having an independent review, and so I hope that is done.
Corinne? Then Danny?
I'm not going to support this motion, and I honestly don't know if we can ever put this to bed. I think there are just certain people who don't want to put it to bed. So for me, we've talked about this, as Tom has said, at this table many times, and I can talk about it again right now if you'd like. So for me, it was early on in our term when we decided we wanted to have an operational review. Senior management approached me and told me to craft an RFP. I had no idea what an RFP was, much less how to craft one. So I did the only thing I knew how to do, and that was to consult the internet and to talk to a couple members of the public that I knew would be able to help me with that. From that, I brought that information forward to a finance committee where there were 3 trustees sitting. We took away from that report, we added to that report, and we handed over the information to senior staff who worded the report and then released it. When we shortlisted and we thought perhaps there might be a problem with our process, we sought legal advice, and we followed that legal advice. And in the end, Sprott Consulting was hired because he was local, and mainly because he was by far the least expensive. I believe we got a good report, and I believe that people believe that we got a good report of the deal. I think we got excellent bang for our buck. For me, it really is time to just sort of move on. Both the operational review, Stacey Holloway's report, and now I see that in our strategic plan, it all speaks to trustees early in their term getting orientation as to roles and responsibilities. Had we had that conversation on roles and responsibilities, I would have known it wasn't my role nor my responsibility to craft an RFP. So from that, I can say, could we have done things better? Well, sure, I think you can always do things better, and I think we've taken steps to ensure that that will happen because we've made changes to our purchasing policy. So for me, it was a learning experience for sure. I think it's time for us really to just move beyond it, to stop spending our time and our educational dollars, which could wind up being considerably more than what we actually spent on the operational review. And I think we need to continue implementing the suggestions that were made both in the operational review and in Stacey Holloway's report.
You want to say anything?
I guess for me, I'm going to support the motion because I don't think this, how can I put it nicely, this witch hunt over this operational review is ever going to end unless somebody independent actually does an investigation and comes out with a report. As chair of the Finance Committee, who was in on the discussions and the decisions, I did not find anything wrong or anybody doing anything untoward in the process. You didn't craft the RFP. You brought information. The Secretary Treasurer was the one who crafted the RFP, put it out to tender. So you weren't quite correct on that proposal. Like I said, I will support the motion. Turn it over and done with.
Okay, and for me, I think that I'm not going to support the motion. And you can't understand the story of the operational review without understanding the context in which it arose, or without actually understanding governance. First, it's really not unusual for any group of publicly elected officials to meet together without staff present. And we've actually, as a board, done that on a number of occasions. We're actually not an advisory committee to board staff. We are actually publicly elected officials who govern the system, and we do need to meet alone from time to time for a number of reasons. It's not dissimilar to the provincial government. Trustee Weber, you work in the provincial government, and I'm sure you're aware that your minister meets with caucus without staff present. Closed meetings also occur with corporate boards and non-profit boards, and this is not an uncommon practice. For me, what is an uncommon thing is when board members attempt to undermine or discredit the work of the board by questioning this legitimate practice. I think that it's pretty clear that the people in the Comox Valley generally are not taking any issue with this, because we have not received any negative feedback, really, about this, except for our one community contrarian. And if I remember Trustee Weber correctly, at the beginning of this term, when you were the vice chair, you made a comment that said you wouldn't take any advice from anyone who had supported the last board. So second, I think we need to consider the context of how this entire matter came about. 3 years ago, the public was extremely angry at our predecessors and also some of our staff because of the elimination of middle schools in the district. And some people even took the board to court. People had a number of complaints. They weren't shy about voicing it all, and I think there were something like 34 different people who wrote 49 letters to the editor of our 2 local papers, conveying their costs about a number of things. Trustee Caton, you wrote a letter talking about your concern about costs of things in the district. People wrote about the process and predetermined outcomes, and our former trustee, Lori Fowler, wrote a letter that pretty much laid the blame for our woes at the feet of our superintendent. I think that we came from a really difficult spot. We had to find a way to move the district forward in a positive way and to settle the fears of staff who thought that this new board was going to come in and fire them. We had an agreement, I think all of us, that we wanted a fresh start. We wanted to do things differently, and we certainly didn't want to fire anybody, that we wanted to work differently than the last board. And one of the things that we thought we could do was to get an independent third party to review things in the district. And so we proceeded to determine how we might do that. The board has acknowledged many times that we have spoken with Gordon Sprott in early 2009, and we realized that this was an issue. We obtained a legal opinion which I would like to read now, as I believe this would clear many things up. Sherry, excuse me, you're not in order. Actually, you're not in order, Sheila. Sherry, I had advised you in advance that I was going.
Please, Madam Chair, I think you should pass the gavel to our
Sheila,
before
can you
continuing,
please?
and that she should hold the same amounts of time
Sheila,
that the others are losing.
I've timed myself. I'm within my time limits. Sherry, I told you in advance that I was going to make a request to read the legal opinion at our board meeting, and you haven't told me either way if I would be in line with doing that or not. So am I okay to read this legal opinion here at the board meeting or not?
May I just back you up a little tiny bit, please?
Yes.
Process.
Thank you.
It's very difficult right now to understand if you're speaking as the chair or as a trustee. It would be better for process if you were to hand the gavel over, and then you can talk and do your thing, that she, and trustee McNeil has the right to challenge or to say point of order, and you do need to hear her out on her point of order. That's the normal process. The legal advice I have is that you would not normally share a legal opinion out in a public board meeting.
So what I would like to do is to request that the board make a motion to release this legal opinion to the public. We have spoken about the legal opinion several times. If you could just stop the crosstalk, please. We've spoken about this legal opinion a number of times, and I think it is quite explicit, and it will show that the board did its due diligence, that when we realized that there was an issue, that we sought advice and that we followed the advice.
So point of order, I'd like to move in camera to have a conversation over releasing that, that legal opinion, because I'm not comfortable doing it right now without having that conversation. Motion to move in camera.
Do we have a seconder?
Second.
All those in favor? Opposed? And that is carried. So now we need some logistical advice. Would it be best for us to maybe go down to the seminar to talk about this?
Probably the better.
Okay, thank you. We'll adjourn here and be back in a bit. Okay, so thanks for back and here out of camera. I'd like to thank Trustee Casey for the suggestion with respect to moving in camera. It's a bit of a pickle sometimes when you're sitting here in full view of the public and the media having a discussion, and there's sometimes things we need to talk about that are of a certain nature. It is helpful to have another way to do that without everyone present. And so I could rise in the report that we did have in the chairman session just now. Spoke about legal issues. And what I would say is I'm not going to ask that the board make a motion to release the legal opinion. But what I can say, I think, is that several times in the past I have made the comment that I believe that the board sought legal advice and gave a lawyer, not Fran Goldberg, who is not a lawyer, who is an occupational therapist, but an actual practicing lawyer that is not a member of our board or school district, gave information to them with respect to what had occurred. We did receive some legal advice and proceeded, I think, correctly with that legal advice. So when Sprott Consulting was hired, they did proceed to interview 29 different people prior to making the report. No one has ever taken issue with the contract that was negotiated with Sprott Consulting by our Secretary Treasurer. They have never taken issue with Sprott Consulting's method of inquiry. We've never taken issue with the report that was produced or the recommendations that were made. And in fact, I think that I have heard people state that they don't see any issues with the report. What we did learn was that our RFP process needed to be improved, and I brought forward a request to review this and see if that gets done. There was an FOI request made last year about all of the documents with respect to this issue, and they've been out in the public domain for a year now. And maybe much to the chagrin of some people, there's nothing more to be learned. It's all out there. And I feel that by continuing on with this, I don't think people will ever be satisfied with this. I think that what we're doing is dragging the good name of a reputable businessman through the mud, not to mention a trustee or two. And when people can't even articulate what wrongdoing they feel, what's happened. We spent a lot of money so far on a variety of different things to discuss a $17,000 contract. In the course of doing so, I think our relationships have been damaged for that. We've had communications agreements between us that have been broken. The concept of a safe and confidential discussion during our facilitated sessions was breached, and there's been even a refusal to try to address our problems through the discussion of closed contact. Despite our problems that seem to be evident, a majority of trustees and staff in our districts are dedicated to student achievement, and wonderful things are still happening in the district despite our problems. So for me, I don't want to waste any more time or precious educational dollars to support a minority of trustees' view that something untoward must have happened. And so I urge you all to also vote this down. I don't think it's important. So I think I'm the last one to speak. So Tom, if you would like to close.
Thanks, I will be brief. So first I'd like to at least thank the board for finally having the opportunity to have this motion up for discussion. It's been some time in coming. I do want to make it really clear and perhaps just restate one thing that I said at the outset, that we are all culpable, except Sheila. So this isn't about a trustee, 2 trustees, 3 trustees. It's about 6 trustees who participated and were present at the board. In the end, I would be thrilled if somebody came back and said, you guys did a wonderful job as a board, congratulations. That would be a nice outcome. I also differentiate between blame and responsibility. There is no pointing of fingers in terms of blame other than the 6 that I have just pointed a finger at, and one of them is me. But it's around our responsibility as elected officials. I do think that either with the acceptance or defeat of this motion, that it will allow for matters to come to a close. Certainly, defeating the motion will end the discussion at the board table, but I suspect will not end the discussion in the community. Having the examination, and again, I'm not looking at and not envisioning a public inquiry of some sort. I'm looking for good counsel from the Ministry of Education, perhaps, as to how we might go about this without incurring phenomenal amounts of expenditures, but to ensure that we do a robust examination of the work and then share that with the public. And, warts and all. And hopefully there won't be. But if there are, then we have a responsibility to be held to account. I think that's fair and just.
All right, so everyone, I think, is aware of what the motion is. So we'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? And that is carried. Thank you. So it's 9:20. We have a motion to carry on with the rest of our business, or we'll adjourn to a later date. Anyone like to make a motion to carry on with our agenda?
Motion to adjourn to the date to which we have this motion to adjourn, so there is some opportunity, same opportunity, same competition. That's good enough.
We have a motion to adjourn on the floor. Someone like to second that?